It is a tiring thing.
Yeah. We're just pressing play on a digital camera.
It's very stressful.
Yeah, it is. And you have to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
That usurps your energy a little bit.
Absolutely. That's why I was wondering, tomorrow you're going to drive it from the street.
Those of you that are standing up in the back, you owe me one speaker. There's one missing CIO.
Okay, let's put that, record that person. Is it recorded?
Yeah. As Greg Boss is coming up here, I want to explain this session a little bit. We're graced by two speakers today, and I'm going to add a little data at the start. So let me first talk about the speakers. Of course, you can read about them in the program, but Greg Boss, who has the center stage, is the CIO of Cook County and has been for a number of years and is prominent in the world of county CIOs. And he also has been teaching at Northwestern for 5 or 6 or 7 years, and also at UIC. David Johnson, who's going to be a respondent to Greg Boss, has taught for 40 years at South Suburban and been an administrator there as well in Black Studies and Sociology and Social Science. He was also mayor of Harvey for 12 years. And I think leading up to 1995, which was right a year after the web took off, which was 94, so it'd be interesting to hear what he had to say about that. And his family has been in Harvey for more than 100 years, which is an interesting little known fact about David. What I want to start with is some basic data that we've just collected in the Community Magic Research Lab, three of us that you may have met here, myself, Abdul, and Abigail Sackman, because this is what things look like in Illinois before the broadband gets turned on, before the speeds jump up. And this can perhaps be some context for our discussion after we hear from Greg and David. So what this chart shows is we went into 7 different cities or counties in Illinois and measured internet speeds in nonprofit and governmental organizations. And what you're looking at here is 24 sites in Chicago, 12 in Jackson County, 10 in East St. Louis, and so on. What were the down speeds and what were the up speeds? And then on the right, what is the difference? So you can see, first off, that wherever you're looking, whether it's Chicago or down at the bottom, all of them, there's a wide range in internet speeds that these organizations are able to use. But the average is generally below the red line. And the red line is where we place sort of a basic good broadband, which is 20 megabytes, which was at that point that we made this chart, the speed that the broadband project in Champaign-Urbana was targeting for basic entry account sign-ons. So one of the things you notice first is the difference between up and down. Upload speeds being much slower than download speeds, which favors a consumption model of use rather than a consumption and production model of use. And then I really want people to see the wide variety. So in Chicago, at the 24 locations, we tested the speeds 0.2 as compared to 89. Wide digital divide there between broadband speeds, and that's download, and similarly between upload. And in Chicago, which you think is going to be the best connected, it's still below that 20 meg speed that we were targeting as sort of basic good broadband. The next chart I want to show is digging deeper into Champaign-Urbana, but I think you would see something similar in all the 7 cities that we looked at. These different sectors experience different kinds of speeds. So the media, the one place we measured in Champaign-Urbana, super fast and relatively bidirectional, fast in both speeds, both directions. When you get down to the government, it's extremely lopsided with regard to download speeds and just about as lopsided with regard to uploading speeds in terms of the lowest to the fastest. So we see disparities within a location, between cities, and within these sectors that we tested. These are the same sectors that we tested statewide. We just don't have the data statewide in the same format that we have here. The last thing I want to say before we move to Greg's is this is just a little sample of what people told us. So from one pastor, we were told, I think one of the biggest opportunities for us at the computer lab, we're reaching quite a cross-section of people, not only the congregation, but throughout the community. So ideas that came out of that discussion included, can we web stream with this new broadband? Can we web stream Sunday services? Can we web stream Wednesday Bible study classes? And really, could we web stream all kinds of community meetings? So not only the government TV channel would broadcast city council meetings, but all kinds of community meetings could be streamed. Another idea idea that came out is, this was from a community that has a cohort of volunteer cyber navigators. Could this team actually be expanded to be a community geek squad that would serve many organizations and not just the public library? Because as the church told us, we're straining to make sure that we have the best kind of software on our computers, and they need a geek squad to help them do that. Next interesting comment that I wanted to share is a public housing IT staff person who told us, "I'm amazed by the number of tenants who have internet and use it every day." So what we thought, thinking about the broadband projects going around the state, could residents actually be well served by wireless in the public housing projects to help them save on the data plans that kick over once you've used 20 megs, suddenly you're paying, or 15 megs, suddenly you're paying about $20 a month for what for many people is their internet, right, on their smartphone rather than on their computer. And then the last interesting comment, which I guess is kind of a pro-library comment, the minute we write our technology plan, it's out of date. Within a month, we've done much more than we planned to do in a year. So this is a library that's really operating at warp speed. Their plans are not keeping up with what they're doing. And I guess the question that came out from that interview was, we were shaking our heads and saying, how can we all move as fast as this library? So with those introductory remarks, I know that Greg's going to take us deep into what he knows about Cook County, and I'm going to get his slideshow started. And at one point in the slideshow, we're actually going to go to the video. So thanks very much, Greg.
Okay, you were so quick you interrupted my tweet. So I think, am I going to bend the microphone down when we get to this
When you
point?
get to the video, unless the wire is showing.
We're a high-tech / low-tech outfit here. It's all right. We're still in transition.
There may be an audio.
There is, it's just not
Okay.
long enough to go all the way back here.
Oh, it doesn't reach far enough.
So I took the title of this talk pretty literally and decided I was going to experiment around what public policy and the information revolution is all about and how these terms connect. As Kate mentioned, I've worked at the county level, I've worked at the city level, the state level. When the Governor Quinn, I worked with him for 3 years, and when I told him in December 2010 I was going to come over to Tony Preckmichael's new administration of Cook County, he said, well, that makes sense. You worked at the state and the city, and I have to go work at the county. In between those things, I spent about 14 years in the private sector and not-for-profit and did technology and financial consulting. And as Kate mentioned, I've been teaching at Northwestern since 2005 in their public policy administration program. And I decided to take UIC up on their offer this past semester and debuted a course called Open Government. I don't know if we'll ever offer it again, but it was a bit of a risk because we're just at the beginning of open government. Some people feel that open government is the future of government, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what open government is and why it needs the internet and why it needs broadband speeds. But the projects for the course are displayed out, kind of blocking your path as you go into the room there. So if you saw the easels and the big 20 by 24 posters there, those are the posters from 10 of my students in the course. The assignment over the course of 14 weeks was to develop a business case and then a poster for a new internet application or a mobile phone app that would help people become better citizens. So you'll see sort of e-voting, you'll see some things with transit. Generally, it's a way to use the mobile platform to connect people to what they need in the public sector data and data that's commonly available. So it ties in with the whole theme of public policy and information revolution. But please, if you haven't already, take a look at those posters. I think I'll leave them up here for tomorrow as well. So here are the two sides of the question. First, how does public policy help advance the information revolution? And you just heard in the last panel, we talked about the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Project, the Southland Project. Cook County is also looking at the western suburbs as well. So how does public policy focus its resources? Remember, there's only so many resources. We're really in a fiscal crisis in the public sector. We're really at the limit in terms of raising taxes. The need for public services has never been higher. So there's an ongoing kind of rationale as to what kind of services get provided, and somewhere out of all of that, we have to find the capital to do these kind of broadband technology solutions. The second question is, how does the information revolution improve public policy formation? And that kind of drives to the question we have in the open government class. And I think that these are interactive and they build on each other. And I think that we find ourselves increasingly working at the intersection of the information revolution and public policy formation. So I think it's fortunate, and that's what everybody that's in information science is getting into, everybody that's in government, public sector IT is getting into. Increasingly, we find ourselves, because of the quality of the technology, the vast improvements in the technology, able to leverage, improve processes and connect people and do all that. There's some warnings along the way, and we're going to kind of get into those kind of things. But first, I want to give you an example here. This is a 6-minute video of how, I think we've got time for that, of how some people in New York are taking advantage of broadband to develop applications. We're going to talk about developers in that application space to use public data for personal benefit.
Oh, it moves to an external screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's right here. There. Okay, start.
But it's not.
Transportation is a natural place for open data efforts to take root in cities because transportation touches up everybody's lives every day. It's how we get around town, it's how we get home to work.
Think about all the different ways that you can find out whether it's raining that day or the next day. You can get it on TV, on the radio, on the internet, you can get it on your smartphone. You never have to pay for it. And the reason that that's true is because the National Weather Service is open. Transit agencies have been very hesitant to share that information with third parties. They've always felt like they have to be the primary source of information providers. But if you take the model of the National Weather Service and you apply it to transit agencies, you realize that you can have just as many options to get transit information as you do to get weather information. And the beauty of it is that it's no cost to the transit agencies. So we opened up our data and we started sharing it with developers. And within hours of sharing that data, developers had taken and built iPhone applications, websites, phone numbers, text messaging services that allow our riders to know where their bus is and when it's going to pick them up.
All of the events that we've seen in transportation open data recently plug into a larger conversation that's happening in the country about government 2.0. One of the most vocal proponents of this is Tim O'Reilly, who talks about government as a platform.
Gov 2.0 is the use of Web 2.0 technologies like cloud computing, social media, open data by government. Government should think of itself as the platform that society builds on, rather than government as a vending machine of actual service delivery. The idea of being a platform provider is you do the least possible, not the most possible, to enable others to build on what you do. In this transportation space, it has to do with thinking about what steps can be taken that will then let private individuals, private companies actually deliver additional services to the public.
We're at J. Felix, which is a great ice cream store and coffee shop in the heart of Jamaica Plain. Right out front, 39 bus goes by, inbound and outbound. And what we have here today is we have the LED sign that a third-party developer installed at J. Felix that tells you when the next bus is going to go by in each direction. We now know that we have 2 minutes until the next bus is going to come.
One of the most popular apps for bus riders here in Boston is an app called Catch the Bus. You click on the app, and it loads for you a list of all the routes. We're taking the 39 outbound. There it is.
So that's from a group called openplans.org, which is based in New York, as you might expect. But they've been out here in Chicago. They're going to do a project for the city of Chicago over the next few months. We're really relying on foundation help in many ways to help us with this kind of trim tab, or sort of the work that needs to be done to show the way to the work that we're going to do in the future. And on the topic of information revolution, I want to break it down even further between public policy and information revolution, and talk about those terms, information revolution. So, by the way, all those applications that you saw, whether they're mobile apps or an application that was built to do the bus sign in the cafe, those were all made by private developers. Usually developers working in small teams, not necessarily, probably not for big firms, but just in small teams. And there's a whole new group of people that call themselves civic app developers. Sometimes they like to be called hacktivists, sort of the combination of hackers and activists. What's great about this group is that they're very inclusive, they're not exclusive. And I think that going back to the previous panel, I think we're going to see opportunities for greater engagement all up and down the skill set continuum of people who are interested in this. So as we have hackathons and as we work with civic app developers, we want to continue to make those opportunities available to people that may not have the programming skills but have the interest and could develop the programming skills to get involved in it. So let's just talk about quickly what the major changes have been in information science and information technology. Certainly broadband gets us the ability to do things and is the foundation for doing things that we've never had available before. The notion of a platform, if you haven't heard of that, it's where you transact all kinds of transactions and almost live a certain part of your life. Facebook is certainly a platform for many people. Google can be a platform for those that take photos. Flickr is kind of the platform of choice. In every kind of area of social life, people choose their platforms. O'Reilly's comment is, how can government become a platform? How can we change government from being a service provider, and we tend to be a very costly kind of service provider. Somehow it's very expensive for government to provide services. How can we change that and become a platform for others to provide services? That's an interesting concept, and we have just the beginnings of open government and open data that are making that work. Mobility, we now expect to have very fast connections to our mobile devices and be able to transact business and get information through our mobile devices. Tomorrow, I think, Brian, you're going to have a group probably talk about remix culture, I would think, tomorrow morning a little bit. It's something I don't like to talk too much about this, but I got into SoundCloud this year and started posting some stuff from years past. And in the notes, I just said I make it available for remix with attribution. It's very important. Creative Commons is kind of taking the place of traditional copyright law, and that's a fairly new kind of development in the last few years. And then big data, which is something, again, you may or may not have heard of, but it's really, with this bandwidth and with huge data sets, just imagine the GPS information from every bus in the city of New York or the city of Chicago. And that's a huge data set, and that's streaming, so there's new data every few seconds of the positions of buses. And you need that data in order to create those apps for bus locator or train locator. We get into the realm of big data. Certainly, the amount of data that's on Facebook or on Twitter, that certainly qualifies as big data, and there are whole new tools to use that as well. How have these changes affected real political revolutionary actions and activism? I just want to point you to two articles that we used in the Open Government class. One is by Clay Shirky in Foreign Affairs last year. The other one by Malcolm Gladwell in the New Yorker last year. Gladwell's article was entitled "The Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted." And he kind of feels the opposite of Shirky, who really believes that the Twitter and the ability to do text messaging was in part responsible for the political changes that you saw in North Africa. On the flip side of that, at the county, being the CIO, I have to be concerned about cyber attacks and cyber security. And I can tell you that it has not subsided, it has only gotten worse. And so I know that at the state of Illinois, we had to defend the state from hundreds of cyber attacks in a week, and that's becoming a day now with government. So you see it as spam to email, a corporation or a government or an organization sees it as a cyber attack. Wherever these attacks come from, sometimes it's for a purpose, like a commercial purpose, maybe to get information, but it might be just to try to take down a website as well, or take down some activity. Certainly WikiLeaks is an area we talked about in class, and just where that falls on the sort of continuum of trying to change government through evolution or revolution. And then finally, I have a former student who returned to China who can communicate with me through LinkedIn, but not through Facebook. And certainly there's pressure there as to what social media, social networks can be used. And that's only going to increase, and it'll be interesting to see just what effect, whether that's done peacefully or what happens there. And so you see the restrictions around the ability to communicate being one of those in a sense, revolutionizing kind of forces or polarizing forces. Finally, indirectly, and this is probably the deeper issue here with the changes in technology, what are the indirect revolutionary effects of these technology changes on people? And I would say that certainly the notion of society of the spectacle still occurs. This is a concept that goes back to an author, E. Du Bois, in 1973. When he wrote that revolution is really not possible because the society of the spectacle is the, quote, total justification of the conditions and goals of the existing system. What that means is that these great tools that we produce only serve to divide us up. The current issue of Atlantic Magazine cover story is Facebook making us lonely? And the notion here is, are we creating tools that divide us rather than bring us together? Or that just reinforce the status quo. And so many channels certainly can isolate people rather than bring them together. Privacy is a really interesting issue for those of us that have been in the IT business and the privacy business for years. It seems to be less and less important to people. And people are willing to give up more information than they used to be. So where do you draw that line about privacy? It's interesting that the Social Security number is still kind of sacred, but so much other personal information is provided as well. Then this notion of civic life and public life and private life. As the public life on social networks increases, does it both crowd out private life we have with our families or ourselves, and also civic life? So what room is there for civic life in terms of the individual's relationship to the democratic government, to the government that really we should all be part of? And finally, just two other terms, DIY, certainly do-it-yourself culture is against mass consumption and mass production. That's a revolutionary kind of thing that's made possible by these tools. I could never do what I do in terms of communicating music, even as an amateur over SoundCloud. I couldn't do that a few years ago, but it's very easy to do it now. It makes tools available that I don't have to invent myself. And finally, just the broad idea of disruption or disrupted technology. Just as the World Wide Web disrupted the news business, iPod disrupted the music business, streaming and Netflix over broadband has disrupted the movie business. They still find a way to make money, but I think that's been my personal experience in government IT as well, that these technological changes are disruptive. Three quick examples from local media over the last couple of weeks, actually. We did press releases and press conferences around these, and that was sort of, that's the story, right? But I'm going to give you the story behind the story. The first one, I mentioned this earlier, but the county is part of a multi-government effort to try to reuse existing broadband fiber optic cable where it exists, and to build new broadband fiber optic to endpoints, including hospitals and courthouses and municipalities. CTA has unused fiber that it put in over 10 years ago, and all of its right of way. So the blue line, the orange line, the pink line, the red line, et cetera, all have fiber optic cable, which the CTA uses part of for signaling and communications to all those stations. And there's access points at all those stations because they have connections to that fiber there. But probably more than half of that fiber is dark. It's not lit, it's not used. So we talked to the CTA, we talked to the City of Chicago, and we're able to write an intergovernmental agreement that gives us unimpeded access to 8 strands of that fiber, which is a huge amount. So we did a joint press conference last week over at county hospitals because the first leg of this project is going on this year, it'll be done by the end of the year. And that's Forrest Claypool, the Executive Director, CEO of the CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, and Tony Cracknell, the board president who I report to in Cook County, and Chris Horstman managed to get in the picture. That's Forrest CIO, so I was just out of the shot. What really moved me about this event we did last week was this is the man, Dr. Ram Raju, who has been brought in this year to run Cook County Health and Hospital System, which is one of the nation's largest public hospitals. It's the 3rd largest public hospital system in the nation. They provide not just charity care, they provide a lot of free care because they provide services to anybody that comes in the door, and they tend to get people who can't get any insurance at all. And that will still be the case even after Affordable Care Act, because undocumented people who are living in the city or anywhere we're left off of the Affordable Care Act in order to get it passed, they will still come to Cook County Hospital. So here's a man who's trying to right-size the hospital system for the future and to find a way to help avoid huge subsidies from Cook County, because every year they come in to the county with a request for additional fundings to supplement the funding that they can generate from fees. So he has a lot to do in terms of bringing the hospital up to date with billing and all that. That's a scene from Cook County Hospital. So we looked at the CTA map and we figured out that we could get high-speed internet connection from downtown, where we will connect to the Illinois Century Network, out to Cook County Hospital, and ultimately to Starlight and the Internet tube if it's going to be made available for this. That will give the hospitals access to 1,000 times faster internet than we have. So they can start to do things like, simple things like video psychology sessions. They can do more complex things like sending files that they currently mail using a DVD because they're multi-gig files. They can just send those over a high bandwidth network. They can do training where they do surgery and they can put cameras and the whole thing in the operating room and transmit those to anybody that's connected to this network. So there's enormous benefits to them at really lower cost because we can do this with this intergovernmental agreement. I mentioned Comcast. I've also met with AT&T. The disruptive thing here is that the private companies want to know, why are you buying and building this stuff? Why don't you lease from us? It's our business. Essentially, we've been in this business for years. It's our business. We've got fiber in the ground. And at first, that was a struggle because clearly they view this as a threat. How do you respond to that? What we ended up saying was that it's purely financial. If we look at a segment that we need to do, in this case it was from downtown going about 3 miles west to Polk and Ogden. If you can lease us something that's cheaper, if we capitalize all the years of the lease to today, and it's cheaper for us to lease it from you for a long term than to build it, then we will lease it from you. So we tried to turn this into a financial decision and be clear about that. So I think that's pretty strong ground. If we get something for free from the CTA, it's going to be hard for them to beat that price. But there are other segments. This is a multi-segment project. We're going to kind of do that and really come back to the private sector as we go through this, because ultimately we want the least cost network for taxpayers. And if the private sector helps enable that, that's great. But if they don't, then we're going to build it ourselves. So it's disruptive to existing businesses. Second one, property tax portal. So for years, Cook County has had separately elected officials to do the recording of deeds when properties change hands, the assessment of property values for taxation purposes, the actual determination of the tax rate and the tax bill, and then the billing of that. So I just mentioned 4 things. Those are 4 separately elected officials at the county level. They each, of course, over time grew their own websites, their own IT around this. So from my perspective as a CIO, I see these silos of operation, and you can imagine how inefficient that is. So just to start, we launched collectively a single website for Cook County Property Search, which collects all the data from all of those sites and all those offices. It makes it possible to see all the data for every parcel of land in Cook County, 1.8 million parcels. So if you enter the address or enter the parcel ID number, if you've got that for your tax bill, then you can get all the information from all 4 of those offices. So that's a small thing, but it's an indication of things to come. It's an enormous change if we can actually carry this through and move through those silos and start to break those down. Again, disruptive. It turns out that, for one thing, those separately elected officials charge for the use of bulk data. So you wonder why you can only get 1 parcel at a time from this website. It's because to get that data set in bulk, you'd have to pay money. So we're kind of questioning that. So there's some business there that we're kind of disrupting, right? But also, the people that can afford to pay for that data set use it in their private business to make money. So title companies, real estate companies, banks, developers use that data when they can get it in bulk, and they pay for it, and they can make money from it. So we're disruptive both to the county revenue that comes in as well as to the business structures that have been created as a result of this. Finally, and third, MetroChicagoData.org. This is the first, what's called kind of community cloud or convergence cloud of state, county, and city data from all 3 governments onto one site. So we created a single site, MetroChicagoData.org, and launched this about 2 weeks ago. What does this do? It makes it possible for developers who develop those apps that we looked at to get all their data, if it's public data, from one site. And it makes it possible for that data to be provided in the same manner so you can mash up that data together. Some of the apps I'm showing here, we've got the bus tracker in the middle, but some of the other things down in the far right corner, we are hoping to see some apps emerge around abandoned buildings and foreclosures. That's going to be immensely useful for community groups, and they can use data that comes from various offices and various levels of government. On the bottom left, water quality or air quality can come from the state, and we can match that up against other information that comes from the local level. So we're hoping to see some apps around that. So you can see that the convergence of all this data, we've got about 2,000 data sets out there right now. It's amazing, but it could probably go to 20,000 data sets. There's so much big data that government has that can be made public and the developers can use, that the sky's the limit for this. The problem with this is, though, that as we put this data out, we made a very conscious decision not to spin it. And it's important in government that you have to always be kind of aware that you're operating in a fishbowl. It's not like a private company where you're accountable to your shareholders, but you're accountable to the taxpayers and the residents and the businesses, the citizens. And when we put this information out, it's possible that it could tell you something about government in terms of its inefficiency or lack thereof. And I got a call from some developers this past week who shall remain nameless, but they have a dilemma. The dilemma is that one data set that they just recently got tells them that a unit of government wasn't performing inspections at the frequency that it should be. So I spent about an hour on the phone with them because the question becomes, do you go to the Tribune with that, or do you go to the government with that? It's maybe a first page of the Metro section story, but if you came to the government and if we worked together to try to come up with maybe even a technological solution to get those inspections to occur huge trust between the developer community and the government that's putting out the data. So we're really kind of hoping that we can engender that sort of trust. It's really just at its infancy, but that's a critical kind of thing. So I think I will just flip through these quickly. The last point I want to make is that yes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but we want to change that. And if people who care about public policy are involved today tend to sometimes be overly weighted by the squeaky wheels, meaning people who have kind of a single issue and just want to get their issue, their personal issue kind of addressed. That if we could use these tools that we develop, we can start to increase that part of the pie that's on the top left and start to move people from that right side who care about public policy, who are involved, into that participating part. And we're hoping that through tools like the ones you'll see in the hallway here with the e-voting and the other kinds of public interaction, public engagement tools, that we can get people involved and reduce the relative number of squeaky wheels. I talked to the person who runs 311 for the city. She says if you don't call 311 when you have a problem, we're never going to hear about it. So we only respond to the things that people call about. And that probably isn't representative of the problems that people have as a whole, but it's the people who do take the time to call. So hopefully I've helped connect these two questions. I think broadband open government will help advance information revolution. And I think that public policy formation can be improved through crowdsourcing, getting, I kind of jumped over that, but getting opinions on what a park should look like. That's one of the apps that was built for a contest we did last year. Gets the opinion of people in the neighborhood about what kind of features a park should have. You do it all on a mobile phone or civic apps, as we talked about. So with that, there's my email address and my Twitter handle, and I'm really interested in engagement and public participation, if you didn't notice. And I want to thank you for having me. Thanks.
That was a fascinating presentation in terms of the applications as well as the potential uses of those applications. In terms of public policy and technology, it seems to me that government has always played a role vis-a-vis public policy in terms of technological applications. And for example, when we look at the development of the post office and public policy with regard to mailing rates and being conducive to the development of local meeting, which was a democratic function, it was public policy with regards to the use of mail that made it possible for newspapers to proliferate in this country. And that contributed to an opened up democracy. And particularly from the standpoint of people of color, African American newspapers, Native American newspapers, Asian newspapers, Chinese newspapers here in the United States benefited from a public policy position that made access to the mail service in the post offices very democratic. And I think we find ourselves at a point in history where technology can be tipped on the side of democracy, or it can be tipped toward increasing privatization and consolidation at the top. The idea of having an application that people can use to voice their opinions in the government is a very positive thing that the technology could do. I would suggest that we could use caller ID technology for people to even vote from their phones, and that would even broaden democracy in this country, particularly as we see that there are efforts to limit access to voting across sets the rules of the game by which the game is played, and to give people greater access to rulemaking is consistent with the concept of democracy, in my view. And so if an app can do that, if the technology can open up government so that we can see how public funds are being spent and appropriated. I suspect if there was a stream onto the television, like we see on CNN, that showed how much the war in Afghanistan was costing us by the hour, people would react differently to going into, or the possibility of going into Iran. So technology, I think, has a very important role to play in terms of policy formation. I think your point about technology putting government in a fishbowl is a telling point, because I know as a mayor, I would get blamed for everything that went wrong, and oftentimes there were things that went right that I had nothing to do with, but people wanted to give me credit for it. and I didn't resist them giving me credit for it. But by the same token, with the new technology, I suspect it begs the question of new protocols. So that if someone using the technology sees that inspections are down, the protocol may say, let's have a discussion. Let's provide us with a reasonable amount of time to remediate and see if that issue can be addressed. And then if it's not addressed, then you go to the Chicago Tribune, you go to the that perhaps can set up a win-win situation for us. I think it's an age-old issue, this dynamic or this tension between a democracy and private enterprise. That democracy is what keeps private enterprise humane and just for the masses of people in our society. So I think we have to keep an eye on that in terms of how we move forward with the new technology. For me, the bottom line is that, and you've given us some very exciting and concrete examples of the potentiality that comes with creating a platform that, yes, indeed, gives entrepreneurs an opportunity to do business, to come up with creative uses of the technology, but at the same time build in accountability and transparency for our society. And I think that's, when we do that, then I think we get the greatest good for the greatest number of people in our society. And I'm going to, let's throw it open for more discussion.
All right, folks, you all are marathoners. Let's ride this day out with some Q&A and comments. Yeah, Philip, can you just use the mic? We do have some people online.
Yeah, so I liked what you said about the sort of disclosure policy when you find a problem using open data. And what it actually reminds me of is in the open source world, you have all these programmers looking at the source code for your program, and oftentimes they'll find a security vulnerability. And there's basically two camps of how to deal with that. One is, you could sell it on the black market, make a bunch of money, or you could just post it immediately and get a bunch of fame. But there's a policy called responsible disclosure, which basically means you go to the organization, you say, here's the problem with your software, here's the security vulnerability, and if they don't fix it in a reasonable amount of time, then you go to the press, then you go to the Chicago Tribune. And so I think when dealing with stuff like that, it's just interesting to think about the other models where you have open communities and how they deal with that sort of stuff.
That's a great analogy. Thanks.
My question is, where is the common sense filter as you go to open government? As an application is developed, is there any common sense that filters out the substance, something that's meaningful, to the fluff that can be easily manipulated, easily distort the function of government? And where does the filter, where does the decision making to take a look at that and apply common or in many cases uncommon sense to what's released and how it's released and how it's delivered, where does that exist in the system?
So we have a long way to go in terms of release of data, and part of it is the fact that some of it is locked up, like the property data that I talked about, because of the existing structures of commerce that are around that. And we also are in the infancy of this government developer activist kind of model. So there's a certain level of trust, but it's nowhere as developed as that model we just heard about and sort of, determining security vulnerabilities and how it's communicated out. So that has some way to go. But if you accept this notion of government as a platform, which O'Reilly talks about, which is starting to gain some currency, it's a big change from a government kind of telling you what its data says. We're going to stop telling you what the data says. We're going to make sure the data is clean and that it's accurate and that it's current, and we're going to put it out there. And then it's really up to private developers whether they make money on this or not. You can charge $1.99 for an app, but if you sell enough of them, you can be a millionaire. I don't know if you do that in Cook County. But honestly, what we want to do is let the market decide what people need. Because we think that at the very bottom, that it's not really up to the government to decide what people need, it's really up to people. And that works out through the marketplace, whether it's those free bus tracker apps that display ads every few seconds, or if it's the one that costs $1.99 that comes without ads. So I'm using bus tracker because that's already a mature kind of app just in the last 2 years, but we have to go way beyond that, clearly. And as we get into apps that, for example, if you had the property data, could produce a list of comparables if you were going to appeal your property taxes, and that it could maybe prepare the property tax appeal for you based on comparables that it could determine from looking at the neighborhood properties. I would think that I might pay $1.99 for that, maybe more.
I think you could build in some controls based upon the unit of government, the level of government, and the types of issues involved, so that people, say in a small rural community, would look at the data and they could have a public discussion based upon the needs of that community. And I think you would have to guard against people using the data and then spending it, like you said, in ways to achieve certain political objectives that are rather narrow and contrary to the public interest.
To respond to that example about the bus apps, sometimes it's not a need. Sometimes it's not a want, it's a need. If there's a repository of, say, government jobs that are available, and someone doesn't necessarily have access to the $1.99 to pay for the app, very quickly we get down to an argument that the whole system could need to be nationalized, just like the Postal Service was to start way back in the day. And there was always the argument about the telegraph network. People wanted to nationalize that for a long time. So I just wonder how you guys would respond to that.
Some people would argue that the telegraph network should have been nationalized, and that would help to ensure greater public good and a freer and a more democratic distribution of news and information. Because with that, we began to see the rise of what eventually would become media monopolies in terms of who's distributing the news across the country. So it's, we can look back at history and use that to a certain extent to inform us in our debate as to how we go forward into the future. But I think the principle of democracy and applying the principle of democracy across the board to as many of the institutions in our society as we can helps to build in the public commons, the public good, and a higher quality of life for the greatest number of people in our society. There's a certain logic inherent in our system of competition that leads to concentration.
So you make a very deep point, which is that you shouldn't have to pay for public information. But then I think that because of the technological advances, innovations, and transformation of the ability to get information on a mobile device or whatever, the question then becomes, if I want to have that information delivered to my phone, do I have to pay for it? And there's still the sort of internet channel available to me. I could go look it up on the internet or search for it. So the quality of the availability of the information may be something that gets charged money for. It's a really important point, because if it's truly public information, the public sector should make it available at no cost. And I think the jobs example, there are jobs banks information online. For example, the Illinois Department of Homeland Security has a jobs bank that connects the job seekers to all the public jobs that are available from all the units of government in the state. But it's on a website. So if we make that available through our open data set, through eChicago data.org, some developer will probably develop something to make it easier to grind through all that data, and then you want to charge for that. So then the question becomes, so to have better access to free data, what are you willing to pay something? So I think we're going to see a lot of variations.
Yeah, I want to engage you on this question of the government not defining what we need and let the market decide that. The market failed. That's why we have a digital divide. In some instances, it was criminal behavior, because they redlined and marginalized communities, and people filed suit, and they had to pay money in order to rectify a problem. That continues. So the market failed, and the history of this country revolves around the public. Without the public, there'd be no United States. Public schools. The European immigrants came here, and public education in Ohio, for example, included people speaking German. Now, fast forward, we don't allow Spanish. So there is a history to this country that we have to come to grips with in terms of the public health. Everybody here doesn't want to get in the elevator when people are coughing, and so we have public health because it's in our common good. We have street lights because it's in our common good not to have accidents. So let's be clear that the public has a fundamental, essential role to play. Now, how does that relate to the digital? The question is, what does it mean? What does literacy mean? If we allow sections of the population to be delinked, that is a cancer in our body. And plus, there's certain people who get delinked, not everybody. So that the racist character of this country gets reproduced by marginalizing blacks and Latinos in particular, and others. But we live in a country today that is dissing the public. Very dangerous moment in the history of this country where ignorance is allowed to spread. And people believe, like people say, we We don't want any big government, and keep your hands off our Medicare. You know, there's ignorance that's governing public opinion, and that is by design. In other words, the media in this country reproduces ignorance, and so we have the Three Stooges are back.
That's got to be the easiest question today. First of all, I wouldn't do what I have done all my career if I didn't agree with you. I've been trying to make government more efficient through technology so that it can do the things it needs to do. Somebody has to pay for it. So all these things cost money. And increasingly, year after year, we find that taxpayers are less willing to pay for the things that we need. And so we're trying to find a way to make government more efficient by applying innovations from technology. But it's a challenging business to be in. It's a challenging government to be in. So we're very conscious of providing things to the public at no cost. But it costs us something to do that. But what it cost us for that open data site, just as an example, when I came into Cook County with Tony Bruckwinkle in December 2010, we knew that we wanted to do something with open government, open data. There was a kind of incipient movement around the country and globally for governments to start to put this information out in a form that could be used for analysis, for applications. You can download this information and use it in a spreadsheet, or you can create programs to literally attach to this data site and to use the information in real time. We were able to get a subscription to a service that costs about $30,000 a year. If I had application developers on staff trying to develop this thing from scratch, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. I was able to do it for $30,000 a year because a company had started up about a year before that and started to sell the service to various governments. They got some venture capitalists to invest in them, and they were pricing it at a point where they knew that CIOs like me would be willing to just buy this or pay for the subscription. But when I did that, I also said, hey, if we're going to do this, and the city of Chicago has done it, the state of Illinois has done it, as a condition of our contract, we also want you at no cost to provide this kind of federated site that all of our data will show up on, so developers and the public have one place to go. So I'm doing this all the time, and I think that my answer to your question is that we need government to work this way to really economize on taxpayers' dollars, because taxpayers aren't going to give us any more of their dollars. And the technology is a really good way to do this and to enable this. So it's a struggle. We're breaking down a lot of silos. We're breaking down a lot of walls. But it's something we love to do, and we're doing this.
Yeah. One of the questions I would have is how can the new technology be used to monitor as well as tax new forms of financial transactions, so that a tax on financial transactions would become a new revenue stream in a state like Illinois, where financial services is becoming an increasing part of the state's economy. So that would be something that we could look at and explore in terms of public policy and revenue enhancements for units of government.
Here's some questions from Greg in the back, and then from Charles, and I'm going to bring this in your direction.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm a former CTA bus operator. So I was going to say I'm a former CTA bus operator, and I remember I went to a CTA meeting where they were going to be raising the fares, and so they wanted people to would give comment, and so I came up to protest this increase in the fares. But to take your analogy a couple steps further, let's say that this infrastructure that the CTA had, fiber infrastructure. So let's say that a private corporation came to the CTA and said, look, before you came, before the county came, said, look, we want to connect to this, want to use this infrastructure. And the CTA were to say, okay, we'll sell it to you, and then to use those revenues to reduce the need to raise fares. So, I was trying to look at how, when you were talking about this coexistence of government and private industry, how does private industry and government exist when the whole initiative, or the private industry is there to drive up costs, private industry is there to increase costs, and government is there to reduce costs.
So I'll bet you that if the CTA could lease that fiber to a private company, they would, but they are restricted because it was federal money that they used to build the fiber. So in the agreement on the federal grant, it prevents the CTA from actually generating any revenue from that. That's not true of every public entity. So the tollway, because it's a self-funded entity, we pay tolls, and pay off the bondholders on the tollway, they can charge companies for accessing the fiber, and they do, and they use that as a revenue stream to try to keep the tolls down, or whatever, what you will, or to do required maintenance on the tollway. But wherever the federal tax money was used for CTA or for Department of Transportation, they could only use it for public purposes. So in a way, Cook County was advantaged by that because we couldn't afford to pay them for that, but we didn't have to because they had that relationship with the federal investments.
Frank, I always enjoy Athel's impassioned comments about inequity, racism. I'm very glad you share his values as you affirm. Great. I want to raise another equity issue, because in line with your first question, which is how does public policy help advance the information revolution? And you mentioned broadband open government as two obvious points. Let's focus for a moment on broadband. The stimulus fund that came from ARRA of $7 billion, roughly, was, I think it was a really interesting play by the government because it was focused on unserved, underserved populations, and the decision was made to focus on the middle mile and leave open the building of the last mile in the private sector. So it was a very, very interesting play from the standpoint of investing in our future. Parentheses, the stimulus program has been much maligned, politicized, but most people understand it's three parts. First third is tax breaks. The second third is money back to the states for first responders, teachers, etc. And the third point is innovation, advancing innovation, of which the broadband is about 1%, was about 1%, 782 million. But so the broadband commitment for unserved populations was a one-shot. What most people don't understand is that there's an ongoing commitment by the federal government coming through the Universal Service Fund, which is $8.5 billion per year. That's in 4 parts, and is now in the process of being reformed to include broadband and not just digital broadband, not just analog telephone. So my question to you, from the standpoint of public policy in Cook County and the state of Illinois, is how can we embrace and integrate the universal service commitment where we both ought to get our fair share of universal service funding from the government in the high-cost areas, in E-rate, in Lifeline Link-Up, and in the with the triple play and so on. It's all been commercialized. There's no minimum service. So there's a backing off of universal service. So what is the role of government here to hold these big companies, especially, hold their feet to, and when Comcast has made a commitment as a quid pro quo for their being able to buy NBC Universal. The Internet Essentials program is a commitment to do the $9.95 per month and $150 for the. But we don't know about it. They're not promoting it. I mean, it's it's almost invisible. So how do we more effectively hold the private sector accountable for their role in participating, and also the public sector in carrying on the universal service tradition, which means that communication should be available to everyone.
So kind of knitting that together with the last question, communication should be available to everyone, but we've kind of gone from a public provision to a private provision. And the private provision is only as good as the regulators, right? But there's one other aspect to this, which another lever, if you will, we haven't really pulled, which is that county, city, state, federal government are all purchasers of service from these entities, these companies as well. Okay? So we have a very large contract with AT&T to provide leased lines in those places where we're not ever going to build, or we're going to lease, because the amount of traffic is probably not justifying the kind of bandwidth we get from a fiber in the ground, right? We have telephones on desks, we have video, we have data lines that we get from AT&T. It's a competitive business. We have to be with AT&T right now, but we either go back to them or we go out to the marketplace, and maybe there's other providers. They've got a good position in Cook County and Chicago, but there's other places where there's maybe better competition. When the state went out with its multi-chapter RFP for telecommunication services, did they, in any of those chapters, reference Universal Service Fund or the commitments of the companies who responded to that RFP? So I think procurement is maybe an avenue that we don't go down very often, but when it comes to these kind of services that are provided by near monopolies, it's an opportunity that we have. So it's a small answer to a big question, but I think it's an area that we could really exert some more leverage in that we don't. That's right.
I would agree that procurement, government using its ability to leverage economies of scale with the private sector to get them to provide services to reduce costs is something that needs to be further explored. For example, we see a resistance to doing that in terms of the purchasing of medicines in this country. I think the same sort of discussion needs to be had with regards to communications technology, with respect to underprivileged communities and communities of color.
I think it's about time. So,
Right.
Can you save your remark for tomorrow? Listen, everyone, thank you for coming. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Registration starts at 8:30. And thanks very much for coming today.